Hello, everyone, and welcome to our panel today, where we're going to be discussing MENA, and with a big question, is MENA set to be the next global EdTech hotspot? We're delighted to have you all with us. We're gonna try to keep this quite interactive between us as panelists, especially after inspirational sessions right next door. So it's quite refreshing to be back in the smaller audience setting. When we talk about MENA, we mean the Middle East and North Africa, for those that are not very familiar with our regions. We find ourselves, most of us, working or operating out of MENA or serving these countries. We find ourselves in a unique position where there's rapid developments happening across countries. Over 21 countries make up MENA. We have different factors that are influencing adoption of technology. One of them being the youth population. So we've got over 50%, one of the highest youth populations. So most of the countries in the Middle East and North Africa have almost 50% youth population. In some universities, we're going to be talking about today, 70% of learners are made up of women youth, female students. So youth is a big theme across MENA, and skilling and upskilling and preparing youth. The second is the government, private sector, and educational institutions are massively investing in education and education technology. Just to give you an idea of the overall investments happening in our region, so one country, Saudi Arabia, announced in a recent conference called LEAP, which in its second edition attracted more than 170,000 people to come in and understand technology. The Saudi government announced over $9 billion of tech investments in a single conference. In fact, in some of MENA's economies like Saudi, we look at the GDP achievement of over 8.7% growth in 2022, which is amongst the highest rates amongst the G20 countries overall in 2022. So despite difficult economic situations and conditions and challenges across the world, we see MENA being set, on a trajectory of a different type of scale and growth. To give you an example, a single market in the region is valued at more than $1 trillion in 2022. So completely different dynamics than the rest of the world at the moment. In fact, many countries across MENA invested more in education than many OECD countries. Hence, we, as people that operate in the region, are not surprised to see a lot of international VCs and startups coming to the region to actually raise capital from our region. Another big theme is leapfrogging and embracing technology. So just to give you an example, in 2017, the UAE government assigned the first artificial intelligence minister. So, one of the first ministers around the world in artificial intelligence. So this is just to kind of set some context about MENA. With me on the panel today, I've got an amazing lineup of founders that represent the region and companies working and serving the MENA region. We're just going to move around very quickly. Each founder and each panelist is going to introduce themselves. And the way that we've organized ourselves is through our offerings. I am founder of Lamsa. It's an EdTech platform for early childhood development. Quddus focuses on students, high school students. And then Yousef focuses on university students. And then Jeff focuses on university and then, post-university. And Iliana makes sure that all of these people get jobs, globally and in top top companies around the region. I'll hand it over to each panelist to introduce themselves in a minute or less, starting with Quddus.
Hi, Quddus, founder of DigestAI. We're an artificial intelligence company building conversational AI to mimic that tutoring experience for a really low cost and extremely scalable. I founded the company when I was in high school. 19 years old today, so we're growing, backed by GSV, is one of our seed investors, and joined by Mark Cuban and a few others. I live in Dubai personally, so MENA is quite close to my heart.
So my name is Alhusaini. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Baims, an educational startup from Kuwait. What we do is basically create tailored content for university and high school students in 5 countries. Not like Quddus, but started second year university as a university project. Moving forward now, I'm 26 years old, trying to operate between those countries.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jeff Watson, president of Minerva project. We are an innovation partner for institutions and other organizations around the world who are really trying to transform the educational experience. We are involved in 2 very large-scale transformation projects in the Middle East, one in the UAE with a public university, and one in Saudi with a broad-scale leadership upskilling program.
Hi, everyone. My name is Iliana Montauk, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Manara, which means lighthouse in Arabic. Manara was born in Gaza. I was living in Gaza, and my co-founder and CTO, Leila Abu Dahi, and I met there. Leila later made the leap to Silicon Valley and joined a top tech company. The amount of friction that she faced in that journey is what we are here to solve, because this region has incredible young talent coming out of all the education pipelines and no jobs. It has the highest youth unemployment in the world. However, there is demand for this talent, not only in Dubai, but also in Europe and the United States for remote opportunities or relocation opportunities. And so we're making sure that this talent does not experience what we call internal brain drain, which is education that leads to nothing. And we're especially focused on Palestine and on women.
Thank you. So as you can see, we've got a really diverse panelists with tremendous experience covering the entire cycle of EdTech and education in general. We're going to start off with, I'm going to start off with asking Quddus about what are the trends. I mean, Quddus, just to give you a background, a lot of the work that they do at DigestAI is into AI, machine learning, a lot of the new trends that we see today in OpenAI, and most of us have recently heard about it. Quddus was building this while he was in school a bunch of years ago. So I think this is a right question to Quddus. What are the trends that you see emerging from the region that can potentially put MENA on the map when it comes to the next hotspot?
Yeah, no, definitely. So yeah, we were an AI company from pretty much day one. We never intended to be an AI company, but it was sort of the best solution for what we were building. And even from the get-go, our first few investors were from Middle East. They were Dubai angel investors, angels from Dubai, and they believed in the whole AI craze before there was a craze. Today AI is a hype word, it's a trend. You can put it in your pitch deck and raise a lot of money. But back then, there weren't that many people that sort of believed in it. Our vision was always building that one tutor for every single student in the world. When you even 2 years ago, a year ago, when you explained that vision to an investor, it sounded a bit far-fetched. Is AI even capable of doing this? Even if it is capable, how would you make money on it? How would you monetize it? But now it's a trend word, and you're seeing the entire world back it. But a year ago, a year and a half ago, Dubai was where we found that backing. Mark Cuban was an exception, but Dubai was where we found that backing before it was a trend. GSV recognized that incredibly well. When I raised money from Mark and GSV, I was still a student in Dubai. I was living in Dubai. I wasn't living in Silicon Valley, but these were some of the best investors to raise money from. So they not only believed in the trend, the trend that is there today, but it was before it was a trend, and it was in a region where that was being supported by the trend. In Dubai, even from the beginning till now, you speak to anybody in the government about AI, they're super supportive about it. You know, it's something that you don't see in a lot of other regions. And when we were going out to raise, you know, that pre-seed round, obviously we were on the back foot because I was, you know, still in school, but we were also on the back foot because we were building something that wasn't super familiar to them. But Dubai was one of those few places that was super excited about the new stuff, you know, the thing that could propel them forward, and then the rest of the world slowly followed when it became mainstream. I think for me, what I saw in my experience was Dubai was able to sort of, Middle East in general and North Africa was sort of able to recognize the trend before it became a trend. And that's because they welcome things with open hands, right? Like a lot of, if in the US, there's a lot of bureaucracy, there's a lot of hoops to jump over. In regions like in MENA, it's super different. So you know, today the trends are AI. You know, everybody knows about AI. Half the conversations that are happening here are about AI. You know, conversational AI has been huge, especially in education, when, you know, a lot of people are seeing the power of how you can use that to, you know, provide everybody with a quality learning experience. You know, 6 months ago, conversational AI was seemed as a fad. You know, we were told, you know, it's a chatbot. Who would use a chatbot? You know, today every every EdTech company in the world is having their own AI tutor, you know, in their platform. So yeah, AI is obviously the golden word here.
And correct me if I'm wrong, I think you've got over 100,000 students learning on your AI platform already, right?
Yeah, so we have one product that has about 120,000 users now. So that uses AI to create resources instantly. So just feed in your textbooks, your classes. It can create, you know, flashcards and summaries.
Fantastic. So in fact, the UAE was one of the first countries globally that says, we're going to use ChatGPT in the classrooms, and opened it up. Like, said, dear ministries and everyone involved, use it as much as you can. Right? Versus some other developed countries that says we're going to ban it across the country, right? Just give you, you know, just to pick up on what Quddus was saying, you know, there's a boldness in decision making, willingness to kind of say, all right, you know, let's do something, and let's leapfrog something. So again, just to be fair, when you know, we talked about some countries like the US that have systems and you know, bureaucratic systems, but they did have large establishments. We didn't have large establishments or, you know, legacy. So we just decided, a lot of countries decided to leapfrog and implement the best, right? Youssef, tell us about how does our region compare to others when it comes to EdTech investments, access to capital? What's happening? What do you see as, you know, you as a company that's operating in multiple geographies, starting from Kuwait? Now you're a leader in Turkey, a leading EdTech startup in Turkey and other countries. How do you see the access to capital and the investments?
To be honest, well, education globally is underserved and undervalued, basically. And when it comes to MENA, it's way much more than that. And mostly, there isn't any single like VC would invest in MENA when it comes to education locally. I'm not speaking of international investors. So coming back to the past 10 years, so if you take all of that tech startups in the region, in the MENA region, collectively, not all of those startups haven't exceeded amount of investments up to $150 million, which is when you compare to other markets. So people today would compare MENA with India, with the US, with Southeast Asia. But at the end, when you compare those elements, so it's a supply and demand game. But you can't compare apple to apple when MENA has way much lowest amount of liquidity when it comes to investments. The other thing and the other aspect, which is why does MENA consider a complicated and complex market to other people, although it's not if you really dig deep. The main factors is basically having a high internet penetration and biggest population of youth would give you the best, I believe, from our data and our financials, is the best unit economics globally. You can find it in MENA.
Yeah, like you were talking to me yesterday. I think it was you've got, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this.
Yeah, sure, no worries. We're an open book, so that's fine.
You know, 30 X on your user economics, and I haven't heard of such numbers for a long time.
So our CAC to LTV ratio is 1 to 30. So we have a huge room to grow and play with those numbers to acquire more users. But getting back to your question, is getting investment in the MENA region is tough? Yes, it's very tough at the end. So me personally, I go to the source directly. So usually I go to LPs that invest in those funds, that invest in those startups,
Or
basically.
family offices.
Which is family offices, at the end, family offices and individual investors. Because everyone in the MENA, basically, today are building their thesis on investing on EdTech startups in the MENA. Although, if you calculate all of the EdTech startups in MENA, they don't exceed 100 startups. Which is, again, once you pour more money in the market, which will increase the value of that ecosystem, where other VCs and other players would come and invest in those companies. But coming back again to the basics, if you want to invest in any EdTech startup, you would see scale, you would see market size, you would see unit economics. Today, everyone is focusing on unit economics and profitability. And I believe the best market to achieve the best unit economics and profitability is the MENA market, based on my experience.
Although we had challenges, just from operating my business in MENA, we had challenges and lots of different bottlenecks across different dimensions that I think are slowly being removed and streamlined. And we're going to touch upon that in a bit. Jeff, I'd like to ask you, you've been working with 2 or 3 big organizations across the MENA region. How are you seeing, the government and private industry and educational institutions coming together? What are the trends that you're seeing? Who's investing? Who's regulating? What's your experience been like in the MENA?
I'll pick up, Badr, on something you said earlier, which is there is a boldness to actions in the region. And one of the transformations we're involved in is of Zayed University, which is one of 3 federally funded public universities in the UAE. And to give you a sense, in early 2021, there was a decision made to take this kind of old school university and totally transform it into an interdisciplinary, kind of modern-oriented curriculum and experience. And by fall of 21, in partnership with Minerva, Zayed had relaunched a university. There were 10,000 students at the kind of old Zayed, and they relaunched with a couple of hundred to start building this very kind of transformational new learning experience. That would be akin to taking kind of a medium-sized UC or CSU and saying in 9 months, we are completely changing the way we approach education. All of that is due to the fact that the government and the private sector, but really the government created the mandate and the funding to make that happen. And you can be critical of things that are maybe more top-down or less top-down, but in this situation, it took sort of that top-down approach in order to create the kind of change on this time scale. And if you think about the US and the fragmentation of the higher ed landscape, no existing institution would undertake that kind of bold action.
And I just want to add to that, a lot of us find ourselves in the Middle East doing sector development approaches. So, you said fragmentation in developed markets, and in the MENA region, it's completely the opposite. If someone's good at something, the chances are that a government or a large private entity will come and say, "Can you take over the sector? And can you help us regulate it? Can you fix it?" So I feel like it's one of those once in a lifetime opportunities for people to come in and invest and take on large scale projects that potentially will have a very long ROI and strategic one. We've been talking about the opportunities, the trends, MENA being an amazing place, but there's lots of challenges. Iliana, you have probably worked in the most challenging environment. So you started the company out of Gaza in the most difficult situations, from a security, from a human kind of like just the worst possible conditions that a human can survive or can endure, and you turn that into a company that or a platform that basically empowers women starting from Gaza and other places around the world to be hired at the top places around the world, solving for talent issues. What are the key barriers that you saw as you were building this in the region, and how do we overcome that?
So I think the key barriers are actually on connecting the demand and the talent, which is kind of the core thing that Manara tries to do. What inspired me to do this coming out of Gaza is that my first day in Gaza, there were sonic booms overhead from warplanes. This was during the build-up to the 2014 war. Since then, there have been more, of course. We were getting ready for an evacuation, and the place I was in was a startup incubator just flooded with entrepreneurs all pitching their ideas and saying, please don't get distracted by this. We are used to this. We still want to build our technologies and impact the world, and we don't want humanitarian aid. What we want is to work and get paid for our work. And so I ended up staying. I went to Gaza for what was supposed to be a 4-month contract. I stayed for 2 years. And when I left, I kept thinking about what's the next thing I can do. And so I think people often think of that circumstance as being the challenge. And I don't think that's the challenge at all. Yeah, yes, of course, people are in Gaza specifically, in places like Sudan as well right now. The region has Syria. There's lots of locations that face daily challenges when it comes to just living. But the human talent is absolutely there. The top competitive programmers from the MENA region are from Syria. They win the competitions every year. One of our competitive programmers from Palestine was one of the top 40 in the entire globe, right? So people can circumvent those problems, and they know how to do that. They don't need our help or EdTech platforms to solve electricity issues or things like that. What they need, though, is the connection to a job at the end, because otherwise people are highly motivated throughout university, and then they face this very depressing reality that it doesn't matter how well they did. To their credit, they are aware now that in places outside of the parts that you have all spoken about, sometimes their universities are not preparing them, are not bold enough. In places like Gaza and the West Bank, universities are falling behind global standards. But people are aware, and they're taking the situation into their own hands through EdTech platforms, and they are all adding to their education. They're on MIT's website, on Harvard's website, on every single platform that they can find throughout university to be better prepared at the end. So what's the challenge? The challenge is that the companies that want this talent, so companies, our engineers from Manara have ended up at Google and Meta and Amazon more than any other company. These companies are dying for this talent. Even now, we still have companies like AWS coming to us and saying, next quarter, we're going to be hiring a ton, and we need more talent, and we need more women in particular. We have goals around hiring for diversity, and those goals at these companies are in very specific categories. Arab is not on the list of categories yet, but women is. And they don't know how to identify this talent, and they're not able to put in that investment themselves. So they need somebody to decrease the friction, because they don't know if you went to Islamic University in Gaza, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And when somebody shows up to an interview and they don't know how to present themselves, because those are things that we learn through our families, there's no platform that teaches you how to interview, then they end up not getting jobs. Layla, my co-founder, bombed her first interview. She showed up and she couldn't even understand what the question was. Eventually, she taught herself how to pass interviews, and when she got a job, she got promoted faster than anybody else, right? So the interview process, the process that companies use, is not at all connected to whether the talent is there or not. And we can't teach the companies, unfortunately. So it's actually faster to go and just teach the talent. So I'd say that's the biggest challenge, is that the companies are not able to identify the talent. And for men in the region, because Manara does work with men as well.
Thank you.
Of course, the talent is there, but the companies don't yet have men who are Arab on their list of priorities to work on. And so in a way, men face even more challenges getting these jobs. But I do think that's going to be changing soon. If you haven't been paying attention, the census is soon going to be allowing Arab to be one of the things that you identify as a background, because to date, the MENA region has been very high producing of founders and talent. People then relocate and they blend in, and nobody realizes how much diversity there is and how much skill came from the region. So I think that's going to be changing, and that barrier will be circumvented soon as well.
Thank you, Iliana. Also, what I see the region doing is developing products, and we have probably 2-3 examples on this panel, where you develop a product in the region, but then you scale it and it becomes a global product. Quddus is an example. You developed a product in Dubai while you're studying in university, and your product now is being used, I think, globally more than in MENA. Just describe to us how were you able to cater for such an international audience while sitting in MENA?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing, I wasn't in university. I didn't get that far yet. I graduated from high school, and so I grew up my whole life in Dubai. I went to middle school. All my schooling was done in Dubai, and there was never a point in my life in my schooling career in Dubai where my entire year looked exactly like me. There's people from Germany, there's people from Switzerland, there's people from Egypt, there's people from the US. I don't think you'll find a more diverse population of students in such a concentrated area than you would in areas like in Dubai or Middle East. Qatar, Kuwait. So, I think that was extremely unique. Like the first, beta of our product, I gave it to my class. And you do that anywhere else in the world, you're giving it to one category of people, one market. I gave it to my class. There were 50 nationalities in that one class alone. And that they take into account their cultural differences, their differences in speaking, what they understand, their ways of comprehending information. So it was such an international market from day one that now when we launch the product in the App Store, or we're here at ASU+GSV, we're able to boast about having a user base that understands the product in Europe, in the US, in the UK. I think that was a very unique opportunity of being based in Dubai, was getting access to an international audience from day one, whereas having, in another position, you'd have to build for your market, then figure out how to build for the next market. Whereas in Dubai, in the Middle East and North Africa, you have such an international population almost wherever you go, right? And in most of the places, it's incredible.
But we're still talking about, the MENA being more than 21 countries. Yousef, as you scale to different countries, what do you need to provision for that's different? Like, do you treat all of these MENA as one country, or do you need to have local considerations in every country you go to?
So the MENA market is very interesting, but at the end, so you need to incorporate in every single country. And at the end, like for us, we create the content tailored of the syllabus of that specific university. So sometimes even some of my fellow EdTech founders tell me, you chose the worst segment ever, which is the most boring and most complex segment. But at the end, the main problem with MENA basically is how you can utilize that market. And entering that market is a way, but if you want to be in that market, you can be in that market. But for us, when we enter any market, we make sure how can we be the biggest player in that market, or how can we be a leader rather than a follower in that specific market. So the main thing that in every single country that we do, to have our go-to-market strategy succeed is basically by hiring or working with local teams, basically. So in Kuwait, most of our employees are Kuwaitis, in Turkey, Turkish, and Saudis. So because those people understand their market better than you. They've studied in those universities. They understand the culture of that specific country. So even if you have experience 15, 20 years, no matter what, no one understands the market, rather the own people that they live there. So I think this is the main factor that most of the people would fail when they scale in other countries, is by like, at the end, me as a Kuwaiti, I can't work in Turkey. If you're a Kuwaiti founder working in Turkey, that contradicts against all of the culture itself, and even in other countries. So I think
localization
is the main key factor.
Hyper localization, maybe.
Basically, yeah.
And Jeff, as you come and do projects in the region, one of the projects that you were telling me about is about human development. So looking at human development, creating leaders. So diversifying. So when people think about the MENA region, they think about oil. They think about these classical kind of income and sectors. You're now involved with some very big projects across the region, looking at developing other sectors, including future leaders. Tell us about that and the willingness to develop people, and what do you see happening across the region?
Yeah, so we're involved in a project with the MISC Foundation in Saudi, and I think one of the really interesting things in the countries we're operating in is that they're actually national talent strategies. And in Saudi, there's a recognition that the economy needs to transform, talent needs to transform with it. And so we are kind of powering the academic side of a leadership program that's trying to upskill over 1,000 leaders within the country over the next several years. And I think you know, a real focus on that is building durable skills, skills that are resilient to economic change, and also building entrepreneurship and other kind of critical, call it next century capabilities that are going to be very important in these markets and really important in these regions. And it is another program, by the way, that is trying to attract both men and women into that leadership experience.
Iliana, can you tell us more about women empowerment across education, employment? What are the trends that you're seeing across the region when it comes to opportunities relating to really getting women involved across all dimensions and sectors, whether it's in education or jobs in the region?
Sure. So, of course, it's a varied region, and even in one country, women have a lot of different experiences depending on their family and their background, right? So I am going to be making some generalizations, but just want to make sure to point out that there is a lot of variety. But in general, and the numbers show it, this is a really special region in that women are studying technical fields at equal rates or higher rates than men, and it's the only part of the world where girls outperform boys in high school math. That's an opportunity, and that's what we've been tapping into. I stumbled across that when I was in Gaza, and I would talk to women about the stigma that women feel around STEM, which personally I felt growing up in middle school. I was always already nervous about math and comparing myself to my brother. And women would always react with, "What are you talking about? We know we're better." My mom's a physicist, you know, she teaches physics in high school, whatever. It was just over and over again this ongoing theme of we know we're better or equal to, and our moms are already teaching all these fields in high school. So then I was getting curious around, well, what is the friction then for getting into jobs like software engineering jobs? Because 83% of women computer scientists in Palestine are unemployed. And the friction is around the mentality or the social expectations for what kinds of jobs people should do and what kinds of jobs women should do, and a confidence problem, which is a universal one. It's not just in this region, that women often struggle with confidence compared to men, especially when it comes to things like applying to jobs. And so that's what got me really interested in this. I honestly, before that, had no focus around women in my career. I just always thought women can do anything that men can do. But I started to see specific challenges that women in the region were facing. We even had women tell us sometimes that they would go to job interviews and be told to their face, because this region suffers from employment opportunities and men are supposed to support families, we will hire men, not women, to their face. So there's that, and there's also just that women get more nervous than men do in job interviews and things like that. So the way that Manara solves for this is by keeping what we're trying to build into an EdTech platform is motivation and inspiration. For people for whom this goal seems so out of reach, it's hard to stay motivated and keep preparing for it and pick yourself up after a failure. And when you go to an interview, you're obviously going to fail multiple interviews before you get a job. It's very rare that you just pass on your first try. And women are more likely to just step back when they face that. Or if their father says, no, I'm not going to support your goal of going to work, they'll step back. And so the way we solve for that is actually by connecting women to each other, to a community, and to mentors at very specific moments. So they'll be in this tech platform, and then end up with a mentorship call, and the mentorship calls are really mostly motivated, or are mostly around keeping people motivated and surmounting those barriers that they're facing along the way.
And we can see that. So I work in early childhood, and we can see that demand for early childhood is increasing massively because women are going to work equally, right? So, and this is something that's very positive that we're seeing in our region. Traditionally, kids would, even rich countries like Saudi Arabia, kids would be sitting at home. General enrollment rate for early childhood was as low as 22% in Saudi, which is very, very low, like below international standards. And the mother or the larger kind of family, grandparents or the village would raise children. And now that women are in the job market, all of a sudden the country is like, oh, where do we put the kids? And for us, it's good because it's sector development, and we get involved in a lot of more projects. But we can see that as a positive trend, saying, oh, women are taking the right jobs, they're moving into the market, and therefore the whole cycle is working correctly. Quddus, just in a few seconds, what's next for you in terms of AI and technologies? Where are you taking this to the next level?
Yeah, so we see the biggest opportunity as like 10% of the world's going to always use AI, right? Today, the students in California, students in New York, students even in Dubai, they'll use AI in their school and their workflows, and they'll be 10x students, 10x learners, 10x workers. We're really focused on bringing the access to AI for that bottom 90% of the world. So we're working on pilots in Latin America, in Middle East, in Asia, trying to figure out where this can provide the most value in the least amount of time, and we're seeing a lot of success there. So so far we've stayed heads down on the technology, building really cool stuff, proprietary in-house, and now the next few months are going to be about rolling that out to a wider audience, awesome, through schools.
Youssef, you talked about investments at the beginning. How optimistic are you about the region when it comes to the investment landscape?
I'm an optimistic person for the region, to be honest, and I believe MENA is a sleeping EdTech giant, and I believe it's going to outperform many other different continents even, because I do believe in the talent that we have in the region. I do believe in the youth, and I do believe of what our people are building also. So yeah, I believe the future is MENA.
Jeff, any last remarks about MENA?
Yeah, I just think it's amazing to me that one of the boldest institutional transformation projects in the world is happening in the region. Not a lot of people know about it now. I'm speaking of Zayed University. They are starting to talk about it publicly. The Minister of Education from the UAE was at Davos talking about it recently. And I think it's just, I too am optimistic that to be able to impact and really change education at a critical moment and then tie that to the kind of future of the region, I think is really exciting.
Fantastic. Iliana, where do you see the next big opportunity specifically for women in education?
I'll mention two things. So one is the connection across the region. At Manara, we serve people all the way from Morocco to Iraq, and I think COVID really accelerated that. This region has had some fragmentation before, and that is changing. And people in the region are inspired and hungry to be working together, and they are networking across the region in a way that is going to lead to a whole nother wave of startups that outperforms the first waves that we've had, number one. Number two, this is the year of the tipping point in terms of it's the first year that Europe started hiring heavily from the Middle East. We saw it in our own hiring partner network at the beginning of 2022. Companies in Europe weren't thinking of the Middle East as a source of talent. Now we have companies going to us and saying, we are only hiring from Egypt this year, nowhere else. And this is a trend that I think is going to accelerate.
I think also the resilience of founders like you and leaders that are on top of technology is something that really differentiates our region. So with limited funding that came to EdTech, we have some amazing EdTech companies and across the region that are building for global products like yourselves. And I think the resilience that we have as founders across the region, in addition to everything else we talked about, differentiates the region and puts us on the right kind of trajectory for global scale and success. And I'd like to thank you for joining us today and thank the audience. We're at the end of our panel. We're going to be outside if anyone wants to continue the discussion. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you, panelists, for joining us.